Ever worked with a complete asshole? In one of my first jobs in games, I was put in charge of like an entire group of people on a large project. And at the time, I thought, excellent. I've run teams before. I've run projects my entire life as a modder. This is an area that I'm an expert in. This is going to go great. This is going to be easy even. And it was, you know? I gave people tasks. I made sure they got them done. I gave them more tasks. I checked their work. I told them they were doing a good job. I was also working like 80 to 100-hour weeks at the time. It was a pretty intense job with an unsustainable workload. And I was going through people-pleasing out the wazoo. Everything was great. If something went wrong, I'd fix it, you know? It's faster that way. I'd check in with the team on calls occasionally. I'd jump on HipChat, assign tasks. Everything was great. But soon we were falling behind schedule. Everyone seemed unhappy. I took on more work to help the team, and they took on more work, despite me telling them not to. They were working longer hours, pushing themselves to their limits as I was being pushed to mine. They were stressed and tired, and despite my excellent, easy leadership, they were clearly aimless. I had a stern talk with them. They needed to work less, but be more efficient because we had a lot to get through, you know? Like, we were shipping in 5 months. I told them that their work was good. I told them to trust me, that it was going to be okay, that we just needed to get to launch. I gave people tasks. I made sure they got them done. I got them more tasks. I checked their work. I told them they were doing a good job. I fixed their mistakes. One day, someone lost it at me after I told them that they were doing great and not to stress about a mistake. You always say that. Stop lying to me. I know you're lying to me. I'm not doing great. This project sucks and my work sucks. They ended the call. They never asked me for feedback again after that. Here I was trying to help to be a good manager, but they were still working insane hours, even after I told them not to, and they didn't want to hear my feedback. Eventually, they stopped talking to me entirely, and I thought, my God, what an asshole. Embarrassingly, it took me years to work out who was the asshole in that situation, which was clearly me, because I had a lot to learn about management. So, back to basics. What is management? A manager is responsible for administering to one or more people. Being a manager in games often involves sort of tasking, goal setting, one-on-ones, helping people learn, giving them feedback, helping them become more efficient, participating in review processes, etc. Of course, these things are different, and I want to state that in this talk, leadership and management will be used interchangeably because in games, they tend to be fairly interchangeable. If you are becoming a manager, you are often a leader in an org. They are actually separate things. It is important to acknowledge that. But I wanted to at least call this out because in our industry, we kind of have to do both. Again, these things are also usually one and the same, but you can be a lead without being a manager and a manager without being a lead. The difference being, you know, one is people, one is features or discipline. And like, I think one thing that we're only really beginning to talk about in games is that management is its own skill set. It is its own unique set of skills that a lot of us don't tend to focus on because we get promoted because we're good at our craft. So if you are the best narrative designer, the most experienced narrative designer in the team, chances are at some point you are going to get promoted into a management position and you'll be asked to manage. You're probably not the best person necessarily, because somebody who's a good narrative designer isn't necessarily a good manager. They are totally different skill sets. Learning how to manage people or be a good leader is its own challenge, and it's a thing that we need to actively work on our entire careers. So in this talk, I want to give you a bunch of tips, frameworks, and philosophies to help guide you along that journey and sort of arm you with further research, in particular for the areas that you're particularly thoughtful about. At the beginning of this, I want to talk through a couple of key philosophies that I've learned running Summerfall and working at the various places that I have over the last 15 years. The first of all is, what is a good manager? You know, we throw around the idea of good management all the time, but what is that in reality? Because being a manager is about having people report to you, checking their work, helping them learn, and these are all the things that we're familiar and used to. I would say these are all true, of course, but to be a good or a great manager, we need to do much more than that. Fundamentally, to be a good manager, we need to build trust. We need to build an environment of psychological safety. We need to build an environment of honest feedback, with the goal of creating a space so safe that people feel comfortable telling us how we have fucked up, no matter how painful it is. A good manager is someone who manages their own emotions, who works on themselves, and works towards being the best version of themselves. They support and uplift their team members, and they're someone who seeks out feedback and growth and helps other people do the same. Oh, fun. As a leader, you know, our own weaknesses and failings no longer impact just ourselves. While you should obviously want to try and grow for your own sake, your behavior as a manager and a leader is now the bar and example for everyone who you work with. And that's a pretty scary thing. Suddenly, the fact that you get irritated in a meeting has a much larger implication than just your own personal irritation, because it tells people in that meeting that they're allowed to get irritated too, and that that's an acceptable and like totally normal thing to do in your workplace. Let's go. Boom. And hell yeah, there we go. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It does mean you need to actively role model positive behavior. Sometimes this even means modeling disagreement. It means modeling argument. In Australia and New Zealand in particular, toxic positivity is like a rampant problem in a lot of our organizations. We don't like conflict culturally. And so in avoiding it, we actually create environments with massive passive-aggressive politics. And as leaders, we need to show that it is okay and healthy to disagree. You need to do that. You need to show that being on time is important. You need to show that you can do your job without overwork. You need to do the things you tell your team to do. Because if you tell the team one thing, like don't overwork, and they see you overworking, it's a reason for them not to trust you, because you are not living the example, that you are not walking the walk. You need to be honest, mostly, to be honest. Like, you need to demonstrate vulnerability. Nobody's perfect. It has to be okay that nobody is perfect, because everyone in an organization is fucked up in their own special little way. And we also need to apologize in public. We need to apologize to our teams, show that that is okay to do, that that's acceptable and even good. You need to own your mistakes so that your team feels comfortable owning theirs. Hopefully you've heard the term psychological safety before, but if not, psychological safety is exactly what it implies. In a work setting, it's a place where people don't fear reprisal and where they can give honest feedback. The question that I get most often when I talk about psychological safety is like, yes, that's all well and good. How the fuck do I create an environment of psychological safety in my organization? The short list: listen and speak last. Gather all the information before you open your mouth. Build trust. Do the things you say you will do. Don't say you'll do things you don't know you can't do. The version of that makes sense. Be patient. Model positive behaviors. Show how you want people to behave. And when people give you feedback, make sure that they know that you understand. Reflect their feedback back at them so that they can confirm that you understand what they're saying. And then act on that feedback and make sure that they see you acting on that feedback. That's what builds the positive sort of cycle of trust. Delegation's an opportunity for your team to grow and for you. Try to find as many opportunities as you can to delegate as possible. Aim to make yourself redundant. Like, a good rule of thumb as a manager is always to try to move upwards and backwards so that you are delegating more than is comfortable. You always want to be sort of trying to help people and giving them opportunities, even to fail, but being supportive and trying to ensure they understand why and helping them move to the next step. A good manager takes on just enough, never too much. If you take on too much and then have to delegate after that point, you've failed, and you've actually shown that this failure is acceptable and it's okay to take on too much and then delegate, which is its own problem. So don't set yourself up for failure. Delegate in advance and in a way that is planned. Don't wait until it's too late. I fail on this one all the fucking time, and it's the bane of my existence. These are like things that are lived ideals that are worth constantly working towards, and then talking to the team about when you're failing and letting them keep you accountable. Because good leadership is about being uncomfortable. Discomfort gives us the opportunity to grow. Leadership is not a comfortable position, and nor should it be. The best thing you can do as a manager is to create an environment where your team feels comfortable giving you difficult feedback. Our job is to seek that feedback out, to seek out discomfort, to find the problems, especially with our own behavior and conduct, and seek to better ourselves. We do this not only for our own sake, but because the team looks to us to understand how they should behave. Again, we need to take on feedback so that they know that they can and they know how to. Similarly, it's important to seek out problems, but not step in and resolve them yourself unless you absolutely have to. Every time you solve a difficult problem for the team, you're robbing them of an opportunity to learn and grow. And I think that is one of the most difficult things I had to learn, becoming a more senior manager. I'm a gap filler. I love to learn things. And so every time on a project that there is a problem, I'd be like, right, let's get it. And I'll go and do it. And then I'd become this horrible bottleneck in every single process that we did, every single thing that we shipped. It was rough. Of course, there are lots of exceptions to this rule, things you should solve, like behavioral issues, organizational barriers, etc. But on a work basis, teach the team how to identify problems. Take them through the process that you have learned, the experience that you have in finding problems. Then allow them to solve those issues with your help if asked. Don't let it go on too long. Give them a chance. Only step in if there's actual danger. One of the biggest things I've also had to learn over the last decade has been that as a manager and a leader, I've had to kind of dramatically rework how I give opinions, feedback, and direction. The more senior you are, the more people will perceive opinion as feedback and feedback as direction. And sometimes opinion as direction as well. It's critical to be clear with your reports in a given situation which of these you are giving. Are you telling them to do something? Are you giving them feedback that they can choose to take on board? Or are you giving them your opinion? These are very different things. And especially as a manager, it's important to delineate for your report, what is happening and why. You have to have a good relationship with production as well. You have to understand production, because whether we all agree or not, management is often a production role. We are often asked to delegate tasks. We're often asked to size work. We're often asked to risk assess. These are all production responsibilities. So as a lead, as a manager, I really encourage everyone to learn a bit of production, because it's going to make your life so much easier. We attribute the negative or frustrating behaviors, and I'm whipping through these, I know, but this is all very useful, I hope. And I will get to some more practical stuff in a little bit, but I wanted to get through the philosophical stuff first. We attribute the negative or frustrating behaviors of our colleagues to their intentions and personalities, while attributing our own negative or frustrating behaviors to environmental factors. It's simple, but fairly profound, and it has a massive impact on us and our teams. It's important to be thoughtful of our own biases and how you can mitigate those biases, especially ones like fundamental attribution error. So the way that this plays out in the workplace is that if one of your reports does something wrong, we're more likely to say it's because they're lazy, because they're stupid, because they're a little bit malicious maybe. But the reality is often that You didn't give them the opportunity to understand what the work was. You didn't help them to learn. And there wasn't support provided for them to have mentorship. Almost everyone, and I genuinely believe that there are very few people who can't thrive in a positive situation. And it's our job as managers to create that situation. And one of the ways that we can do that is by mining for conflict, which is a thing that as Australians and Kiwis feels deeply wrong to us. We have an issue with directness and with brutal honesty. We don't like conflict. And this can create, as I said earlier, an atmosphere of passive aggression. And that lets issues fester that quickly become mountains, and they quickly become insurmountable. Conflict isn't to be avoided. Healthy, respectful conflict is about finding the best collaborative approach. Our job as leaders and managers is to find information and mine for disagreement. Because every time we can find a disagreement, it's a thing that won't come up later. And it's a thing that we can then work on. We can collaborate. We can come to alignment. Surface the conflicts in any room that you're in. As soon as that conflict arises, interrupt. Remind the people involved that conflict is okay and healthy and good. Give them permission to disagree. It's okay for us to disagree. And then model positive conflict. I remember early on in Summerfall, my co-founder David and I are both deeply conflict-avoidant people, and we knew that this was going to be a problem because people wouldn't feel comfortable disagreeing in meetings. And so we would plant disagreements that we could have so that we could model that it's okay to have a disagreement, and there's a healthy way to do that. And it was just fully planned. And it enabled everyone to understand what a healthy argument looked like, what healthy disagreement looked like, that actually you can come from two different perspectives and find the similarities, and then you can collaborate from that point. After that, people felt a lot more comfortable. It took us about 6 months of work to be okay, this is what it looks like. This is what positive conflict looks like. And after that point, we started to have more honest conversations with one another. Because at its core, a lot of management is about information and not control. Bad management, it's easy. You just try to control an entire situation from every angle. Good management is about uncovering information, finding issues. We're gathering information, we're synthesizing it, and gently guiding the team towards solutions, ideally letting them be the architects of those solutions so that they can learn. Understand what information is important in your team, and make sure you understand how to gather it. In meetings, use your experience in your discipline to ask smart questions and stupid ones. Our job's to guide and collect, to garden, to plant seeds. It's not to run an industrial farm. Especially when we're experienced, though, it can be pretty easy to kind of become a little bit calcified in our opinions. We've tried something multiple times, it works, and yes, absolutely, experience tells us that means that we're right. It can be very easy to let this happen and then not push against it. It works, why change it? Allow people to try things in new ways. Sometimes they'll fail, great. They've learned something. You've learned something. Go into conversations with the intention of actually listening to them. Shut up. Something I have a huge hard time with. Let other people speak first. Speak last. Gather all of the information and then speak. Just because something is not how you do it doesn't make it wrong. As leaders, we have so much to learn from the people that we work with. We should be taking advantage of that, not forcing them to adhere to our own outdated worldviews from 5 years ago, 10 years ago when we learned. So a lot of those are a lot of the frameworks that we use at Summerfall for management. These are the basis for a lot of the processes and the ways that we run the studio. I'm going to talk a little bit about individual management. So how do we handle an individual report? What are the different processes? And I'm going to start with the most important tool in our arsenal, One-on-ones are, arguably, the most important thing you can do as a manager. They're your most effective tool for spotting risks and issues, knowing when to put safeguards or rails in on someone, and when to call a team member in to help them address their behavior. Important not to call them out in front of the team, call them in privately. The thing a lot of people miss is that while all these things are great, they rely on one thing: trust. One-on-ones are fundamentally all about building trust. How do you do that? Well, I don't know, I can't answer that for you. Like, we all each have our own ways of building relationships, and you have to understand yourself and how you relate to other people. It takes time, honesty, and vulnerability. This is some of the advice that I generally give to people when they're talking about one-on-ones. Like, to run through them quickly, it's like, try not to move a one-on-one if you can avoid it. Like, they should be sacred. You should be doing them on like a bi-weekly basis. Like, they should happen regularly. Don't do them monthly. The repetition of it is really important to building a positive relationship. You want to get to know this person. You want to understand them. You need to understand what they like. How do they like to be rewarded? How do they like to hear feedback? But critically, one-on-ones should really ideally be led by the report. As managers, it's very easy for us to just sort of bulldoze our way through a meeting like that, ask a bunch of questions. How are you going? What are the issues you faced? But the best thing that we can actually do is arm them with the ability to run those meetings themselves. You are a resource to help these people. And it's going to take time to give them the confidence so that they can run their own one-on-ones and ask for the things that they need. But if you can get them there, it's probably the most valuable thing you can do for them, because it's encouraging them to take a role in their own careers. If you've done that, like, you've done an incredible job as a manager. Your job's to get to know these people individually, to work out how you can help them be the best version of themselves, to scout on the future. On the horizon for their future, and help them hone the directions they want to move in. Especially with juniors, they don't know what they want yet. They don't know where their skill set can take them. We have a guy at Summerfall. He's 25, his name's Ethan, he's wonderful, and he started out in cinematics with us. He was from a traditional animation background. And very quickly, I caught on to the fact that he made games in his own time. He loved horror as a genre. He did a bit of design. He did a bit of environment art. He did a little bit of narrative design. He did engineering. He kind of did everything. And he did all of this in his own time. And through conversations with him, it became increasingly clear to me that this was a fucking excellent designer in the making, particularly in level design, because level design is the confluence of all the things that he was good at. And in talking to him over our one-on-ones, I was able to sort of I didn't tell him that. Just because I thought that didn't mean that that's what he would be good at. But I was able to help ask guiding questions and help him to realize the areas in which he wanted to move. And so on our last project, he did level design. And on our current project, he's fully moved into a game design position. He didn't know he wanted to do that. But because of the conversations I was having with him, I was able to scout on the horizon for the version of him that he could be. We need to understand what are our team members' strengths, what are the triggers that activate those strengths, what their learning style is, and how they like to be rewarded. Some people like to be publicly praised in a meeting. Some people like a quiet, good job. Some people like money, and that's the only thing that motivates them. And that's fine. If that's what works, that's what works. Understanding the people that we work with and helping them to understand us is really critical to building that trust. And a huge part of building trust is honest feedback. Your goal as a manager is twofold here: to provide honest, clear feedback that helps people to improve, especially when it's uncomfortable for you to give, and to create a space of trust and psychological safety where people will give you uncomfortable feedback. If you don't give people feedback, like I used to not do, if you used to just be like, that's great, good job, they will immediately stop trusting you. Even if their work is good, they will simply think that you're lying to them because it's not possible that every piece of work they do is good. You must be lying. So mine for the problems, give them the feedback, help them find the issues. Don't do it in a cruel or malicious way, but be direct with them. I encourage you to read the book Radical Candor. It's very good. I will have a reading list at the end of this that has a bunch of books in it, including this one, so don't stress about taking notes there. Because it's really important to understand the difference between nice and kind. Nice is cruel. Honest is kind. Giving good feedback has to be clear, specific, and actionable. If you find yourself giving feedback that doesn't have a clear outcome, where you're not able to describe what it is you want, it's time to go back because you're giving bad feedback. Work out what you want and try again. On the other side of this, it's very easy for us as managers to give generalized compliments. Great work. Good job today. Especially when you have a high-functioning team who are incredible at what they do, it also becomes really easy for everyone to hyper-focus on small mistakes. Everyone wants to improve when you're part of a great group. But as a manager, as a leader, we have to make sure that we're reinforcing the things we want people to do. So if someone's been struggling in a specific area and does a good job, give them a specific time-bound compliment. Don't wait too long. Let them know as soon as you can, however they feel the most comfortable. Just like you should be modeling positive behavior, when you see it in the team, reinforce that positive behavior with a compliment. Let them know that that is good. I know it sounds a little bit like training a dog. I don't mean it that way. But it's hard for people to sort of self-evaluate in that sense unless somebody tells them. On this note, performance reviews are a chance to revisit successes. And ideally, they really shouldn't contain new feedback. It should be a culmination of everything that you've gone through in your one-on-ones. If you get to the end of a year and you do yearly reviews or reviews every 6 months, and there's new information in those reviews, you might want to think about how you're giving your feedback, because it probably means that you're not, and you're just waiting until you're forced to. That's not great. There are many models for performance reviews. Each company does it a little bit differently. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about those. There's direct, there's 360 reviews, there's peer reviews. But again, whatever way you use, your win condition as a manager is to get feedback yourself so that you can help build a better environment for them, as well as assist them to be the best version of themselves. And now we're going to get to sort of your more traditional pipeline as a manager, which is kind of hiring through to firing. Fun stuff, less fun stuff. Hiring is one of the most important things that we can do as a manager. If a hire doesn't work out, it's usually not their fault. It's usually our fault for hiring the wrong person or not giving them the best support we can. In the right environment, as I said, I genuinely believe the vast majority of people can become high-performing, amazing team members who contribute positively. It's critical, however, just still to hire the right people, because those people are the culture of your studio and your team. Every single person you bring in is going to shift that culture because they are the culture. To talk about company culture like it's this separate entity is ridiculous. It's the people you work with. Hire for personality and then skill, because you can teach skills and you can't teach someone not to be a fuckhead. So when should you hire? This is something that's often out of our control as managers in a lot of organizations, especially if you're within a larger organization. But as a manager, part of our job is often to support and protect your team. And when they start feeling pain, it's your job to find ways to resolve it. When there's simply too much to do, the painkiller of a short-term solution is rarely viable in the long term. Sometimes you have to advocate for a hire. And to do this, you build a case, which means working with your producers, getting the data, explaining that you're doing, 80-hour work weeks, and oh my God, it's just not sustainable, and your team's really starting to notice. However, there's a mistake we often make, and I think it's really important to mention this too. We assume that by hiring somebody new, we gain one person worth of productivity. That's not true at all. Best case scenario, one new person is actually like 0.75 of a person of productivity. Normally, it's like 0.5 to begin with. Especially for a junior, it can go as low as like 0.25 or 0 for a while. Because what we don't take into account is learning and management overhead. It takes a lot of time to manage somebody new. It takes a lot of time to give feedback. It takes a lot of energy to make sure that you are looking after your team. And it takes a lot of energy for them to learn how to integrate into a team, to build the relationships they need to build, to learn the language of your team. They're not going to be a whole person worth of productivity, probably ever. And the larger your organization is, the lower this number goes. So doing what in AAA we tend to call fire hosing, which is just to throw people at a problem, is rarely the solution, because that requires management overhead. It requires people to make sure that everyone is moving the same direction. Somebody's got to do all those one-on-ones. Somebody's got to make sure that people have the same vision. As a leader or manager, you'll often be tasked with interviewing candidates, especially for technical interviews. There are as many ways to do this as there are people. And again, it's its own skill set that you'll need to develop. Real quick, work out what you value. What do you care about most in a role? What questions can you ask to determine if somebody fits those values? Go for culture add, not culture fit. Culture fit will create more of the same. So if your organization looks straight and white and male, culture fit is just going to bring you more of that. Look for things that bring additions to your team. Look for the I don't know, or here's how I'd find out, not the I've got an answer to everything. In an interview, if somebody tells me, if someone has a perfect answer for every question, that's actually a red flag for me. I want to hear the limits of what they know. So I'm pushing to the point where they feel uncomfortable, because I want to know how they deal with discomfort, but also I want to know, how do they deal with something they don't know? Because I'm looking for someone who's just going to be honest with me. And ideally can then be like, yeah, I don't know, but here's how I would find out. Because interviews are all about understanding how people think, not necessarily about what they do. If you can, try to find a way to replicate a work environment to see how they deal with everyday situations. That's kind of hard. But the best interviews are conversations, not interrogations. If you're just reading from a list of questions and they're responding, that's not the best version of an interview. The best version of an interview is a back and forth. It's a conversation. The other thing to keep in mind is that the interview process is the first experience someone's going to have of your organization. Make your part of it as indicative of how you work, how the company works, as possible. A lot of people have really fucking shitty interview processes, and that actually says a lot about the studio that you're going to work for. If you have a bad process, if somebody misses a couple of your emails, if they're late to the call, as a candidate, that tells me how you're going to treat me and how much you respect me. So take it very seriously. And generally speaking, just try to hire people who are smarter and more skilled than you. You want to be the most stupid person in the room, ideally. You want to learn from the people you work with. Similarly to the interviewing process, the onboarding process for new team members is really critical because it's their first experience of work at a company. It sets the tone, it sets their expectation, and they're going to use it as a rubric for what the rest of their experience would and should look like. As a manager, we're often told to introduce a new team member around, sometimes if we're lucky, they'll get some kind of company onboarding, okay, here's your desk, or here's all the apps that we use, there might be an employee handbook somewhere in a drive somewhere. Our job as managers is to try to make that process as repeatable and structured and positive as it can be. I really recommend having a personalized onboarding checklist for your team, even if it's really short. Something you can replicate that has all the key stuff that they need to know for your team. Onboarding is as much about culture as it is about work. What's the expectation for behavior? What is not acceptable? What kind of non-regular things does your team do? Our team goes out for coffee every day after stand-up when they're in the office, and for everyone else, they jump onto Hangouts and they usually chat for 15 minutes. It's important to explain what people should expect every day. And we need to put time into training these new people. We're often asked to train people, and again, like, training is its own skill that we're never actually equipped for when we start. It's a complex skill set. It takes time to learn, but when you are having to do it, break down everything you've learned about a particular topic into just word vomit it into a Word document. How simple can you make it? What are the mindset shifts that you went through? Like, what were the aha moments for you? Those are the ones that are really critical to share. A useful tool that I find is 2, 2, 2, and 2. 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, and 2 weeks. This is a great retention tool. Repeat something after 2 minutes, 2 days, and 2 weeks. 2 hours too if you can do it, but I don't know. 2 hours, 2 minutes, 2 hours, and 2 days is quite a lot. If you can, train a cohort of people. Don't just have one. Like, if you've got 2 people, that's way better because they can actually ask questions of each other and they can gain confidence in that process. And try to record your training sessions and document everything to make it easier next time, because chances are, even if you're not the one doing it, somebody else is going to have to do it. And having somewhere to start, it makes it so much easier. Unfortunately, firing people is obviously the hardest thing that we can do as a manager. If someone's really struggling in their role, this means that they've not been well trained, they're not well equipped, or simply not the right person for the role. Unfortunately, these are all your responsibility as a manager. Well, not always. Sometimes there are just people who are shitheads, and we can't monitor for all of them. But if someone fails in a role, it's important to really reflect on why that happened, because chances are you played a role in it. So before ever considering performance management, a legally specific process that can lead to firing, make sure that you've given plenty of clear, specific feedback and given them time to enact it. If you've spent a minimum of 2 to 3 months working with somebody on a severe issue or issues, and it isn't going anywhere, that's when it's time to enter into performance management. Be clear with the outcomes you're looking for. Describe exactly how to get there. What is their win condition? The goal is for the person to pass performance management, to get better, not to fire them. Do your best to make this possible. And if you do have to fire somebody or make them redundant, do it with humility and kindness. It means they were not a good fit, not that they were a bad person. And my one recommendation that I'd make here practically is a lot of this happens in meetings that get sprung on people. Send them the letter in advance of a meeting so that they have time to emotionally absorb it, formulate the questions, talk to their union rep if they have one, and they can actually come to that meeting prepared. It's not super okay to spring something horrible like that on somebody out of the blue. It's just not great. Sometimes you've got to do it because management is telling you to, but when you have the opportunity, be thoughtful about it and think about how you would want this process to go if it were you. I don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm gonna go through this as quick as I can. And if anyone wants these slides, there is there's an email at the end, and I'll happily email all of this and the notes to you. Couple things. Lateness is a respect issue. Frame it as such. Does the person who is chronically late respect you and their coworkers? Of course they do, or well, we hope. Being on time is how we show this respect. Being late is just disrespectful to anyone and everyone. And a lot of people frame lateness as a personal failing. But if you frame it as a respect thing, people are much more likely to sit up and take notice. Slacking off is not always slacking off on a similar vein. Inter-team conversation is often about relationship building. Recognize when this is occurring and find ways to redirect it to the appropriate times. Don't shut it down. Make sure there's a space for your team to shoot the shit and vent and just be people. So much of team building happens like just on a random call when they're just talking about fucking shit, or like around a lunch table, or when they go out to coffee. These are the moments when they are building their relationships, and even if that's not strictly work related, that is actually helping them do their job. And finally, like, help teach people to disagree and commit. Like if you have a situation where someone violently disagrees with the course of action that you need to take, or you violently disagree with something you need to do, it's really important to like let there be a space for people to vent, for people to talk about that disagreement, and then agree to disagree and commit to the course of action, and let them know that it is not always going to be you in the right, and have times where you disagree and commit. Show that that is good and okay. We're never going to agree on everything in a workplace. So model that behavior as best you can. The transition from being a non-manager or an individual contributor, IC, to manager is pretty complicated. Be patient with yourself. As a manager, your perspective has to fundamentally shift. You're no longer thinking just about yourself and your deliverables, but you are also responsible for another or multiple people who now look to you for direction, feedback, advice, etc. And as I mentioned at the start, like becoming a new manager is so scary, especially when you don't know what you're doing, which is the case in most roles. Like when you become a manager, you're like, I just feel like I got it. And then suddenly they're like, here's 3 people. That's fine, that's normal. It's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to acknowledge that with your team too. Like, remember that you have a whole new skill set to develop that's going to take time and practice. Recognize that this is the case, except you will fail and learn and grow. And, it doesn't hurt for those of us who are more senior as well to be reminded of humility in the workplace. It's just a good thing. To go back to being a junior it's important because it reminds us what being a junior feels like. When you become a manager for the first time, when I talk to other managers, a thing that comes up a lot is workload versus management time. Even as an experienced manager, handling the delicate balance between the work that you have to do and the administrative overhead of running a team is pretty complex. Be realistic with yourself and studio leadership. Management takes time, and it should. One-on-ones take time. All of our one-on-ones are at least half an hour long. Usually they're an hour. And that's every 2 weeks for everyone at the studio. At Summerfall, we usually assume 1 day a week for managers is taken up by administrative overhead at minimum. And we do a 4-day work week, so that's a lot of time. Meeting hygiene is a part of that too, where it's a lead by example thing, but make sure that your team has good meeting hygiene. So every meeting should have a clear agenda in advance with clear necessary outcomes. If there are things that people need to see in advance, make sure they actually see it. It's a waste of everyone's time to go through it together unless that's absolutely critical or you're trying to dissect something. Collective time should be for problem solving and ideation. And as a manager, we often have to set up meetings. So think about what the meeting is for. What's the purpose of this meeting? And if you can't articulate the purpose of a meeting, maybe it shouldn't be there. It's often up to us to delineate different roles, assign responsibilities, and ensure people are clear on what they need to do. This can be remarkably hard in practice. So one tool that I find very helpful is a DCI matrix or a RACI matrix. So DCI is driver, consulted, informed. A RACI is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. They're just 2 models, but they're basically the same thing. Who is the person who is responsible for decision making, who's accountable for getting it done? Who is the person who needs to be, or who are the people who need to be consulted for their expertise? And then who needs to be informed about the progress and process? We build a literal chart for every feature or every discipline. And this often requires conversations between team members to work out who's actually responsible for something. But a lot of the problems within teams occur because it's not clearly delineated who actually has the responsibility versus should just be informed. Direction and vision need to be really clear. One part of management that often isn't discussed is the importance of understanding and managing risk within your team. As a good manager and leader, it's your job to understand the strengths and weaknesses of a team. So I really encourage you to build a risks and issues log that you come back to regularly. Escalate issues you can't solve, mitigate risks you can prevent, communicate upcoming problems your experience tells you might occur, and you get the team involved. So the way that we do this is we have like a risk workshop every couple of months where I ask the team to like literally just vomit every single possible problem they can imagine. And then we put it all in a giant spreadsheet and we rate it. And we will then, from the top down, I'll start going through like, okay, what are the critical stuff that's urgent? And start to put in actions against those things. This helps to resolve a lot of problems within a team, and solves a lot of issues. I'm not going to go through this. We don't have a lot of time. I'm happy to talk about this and send you these slides afterwards. There's a lot of stuff here. Most importantly, you are the bottom of the pyramid, not the top. I think it's very easy as we progress through our careers to be like, well, we're more senior, so therefore we should have more say. Or we're more senior, so our opinion is more valid and relevant. And sure, we have experience, and that should come into the equation. But actually, our job is to support. It's to help them be more experienced. It's to help guide them in the right direction, to help them feel like they can have confidence, to help them feel like they can give you feedback so that you can be a better manager. Thank you very much. I strongly recommend these books. These are fucking great. I've stolen shit throughout this talk from all of them. I continue to steal shit from them. If you are a manager and you haven't read at least a couple of these, I really encourage you to, particularly Radical Candor and The Art of Leadership. The Art of Leadership is super easy to read, and it's broken out into I'm a new manager, I'm an experienced manager, and I've become a director, oh no. And it's very helpful. So anyway, have a lovely NZGDC. Thank you, everybody.